These stories will almost make deforestation look good. Almost. This is Darkness Prevails, the best place to share your creepy true stories with the world, because this world is a strange one. Unexplained disappearances, bizarre staircases, unsettling creature sightings. It all goes down in the woods. The forests seem to be the home of unexplained and horrifying phenomena, but we keep going in there, ready to get lost or become food for something bigger. Enjoy these allegedly true stories of the terrifying things found in the woods. Remember, you can share your true stories using the links in the description. And think about pledging just $1 on my Patreon at patreon.com/darknessprevails. Thank you. Real quick, here are my favorite early comments from my Valentine's Day video. Reaper Tells says, "Joke's on you, I don't have a heart. No worries, you can have some of mine. I hope you enjoy extremely high blood pressure." Motionless says, "I love the intro to your videos." I do too, I'm glad I improved it. I think the intro graphic is pretty fierce. Robert says, "More nightmares, I can hardly wait." That's my reaction every time I hear about a new scary movie. Nabil says, "Valentine's is a hoax made by florists." No doubt, but my wife loves the chocolates. And Tegan says, "I literally have no idea what to say, so I'm just gonna go with the classic. Do you like jazz?" Kind of, but I do prefer the Bee Movie. Now, let's see what's hiding in Mother Nature. Number 1. The Tower in the Woods. Submitted by Julia B. I live in a small rural town in Quebec, Canada. In front of my house, there is a small forest with some really nice trails, and I would often take my dog Sokia for a walk. I would usually take a trail that would go up to a farm and walk it back and forth. One day, I discovered another trail that would bring me back to the end of the normal trail like some sort of loop. And in that new trail, I saw a really cool handmade tower, probably made by some teenagers. All in all, it was a very strange sight to see something like that in the middle of the woods. It had 2 floors and was decorated with some road signs, which made it look even weirder. One day of October 2017, I took my 7-year-old brother out with me for a walk with the dog, because my mother wanted him to go outside instead of playing inside with his tablet all day. So we got out in the woods, and I decided to show him this tower, because I was sure he would like it the same as I did. Unlike any time before, once we arrived at the tower, the whole forest went eerily quiet. But because the tower was new to my brother, I was more focused on his reaction to it. He seemed amazed. We took a few more steps towards the tower, and I noticed the silence. Never before had being in these woods felt so wrong. Something didn't want us there. I hated the feeling, and I wanted to just leave. Trying not to sound scared, I told my brother that it was time to leave. We had to get back home before it started getting dark, and I didn't want him or the dog attempting to climb it, as there were thorns around it, and I didn't want them getting hurt. As we were leaving the place, I started to hear some music coming from inside the tower. And no, it didn't sound like a radio or a CD player or anything like that. Nothing like a teenager would be listening to. Instead, it sounded like an ancient music box, ticking its tunes over a metal cylinder. I was hoping I was just hearing things, but then my brother asked me what was making the music. I didn't want him scared. Again, it would make it easier to go home if we were all calm, or at least if he was calm. So I told him that it was just my phone playing the music, because I probably pressed a button by accident. Then I pulled him along with me, speed walking, trying to get us both away from the tower. I felt like someone or something that was there at the tower was trying to scare us, and it was working. When we got on my usual trail to go back home, my dog stopped right in his tracks and stared into the woods we had just exited in the direction of the tower. I called out to her, told her to keep going, and then I heard the sound of footsteps and branches breaking. The sounds were coming towards us. I was horrified, and I pressed on even harder and faster, telling my brother that we were going to run back home, make it a race just for fun. I was going to let him win because I wanted to keep an eye on him. As we were running, I started to look around to try to find the person or thing that was pursuing us, and I never saw anything. When I was looking in the general direction of the sounds, my dog was following us, but she would stop sometimes to once again look back into the woods where those sounds were coming from. Usually, she would bark at the sounds from the woods, but all she would do was cock her head to the side and stare as if she was hypnotized or curious as to what they were. As we exit the woods, almost home at last, I hear something clear as day. The low, raspy laughter of an old man coming from the trees. Chills and goosebumps erupted all over my body. I turned in an instant to see what it was, but there was nothing there. Just my dog bursting through the tree line in order to catch up with us. When I told my mother what happened in those woods, she told me that someone was probably playing a prank on us, and that the music was probably just a sensor that we triggered while leaving the tower. But I know what I heard in those woods. I still go back in them to this day with my dogs, but I only take my trail. I want to go see the tower again, but part of me knows, for some reason, some way, the tower won't be there when I go back. Number 2. Monsters in the Forest. Submitted by Johnny. In all of my life, I've never encountered a thing quite like this. I live alone, just me and my boxer named Dutch. I'm 26, but I'm taking a few years for myself. At the moment, I live in a cabin, only a few miles from the nearest paved road. It can get very lonely out here. I used to have a girlfriend, but I caught her cheating on me, and you know how that goes. Not much happens out here in the cabin, but I was on my way home one day from doing some shopping in town like I often do. Dutch was riding up in front with me. We got home and something seemed off. I walked up to the front door, and I saw clear as day that something had been scratching at it. There were claw marks all along the side of my house and on the front door. Now, I'm 6 feet tall, and these claws went up about a foot over me on the walls, and with how deep they were, I immediately assumed that a bear had wandered by. It wasn't the first time I'd found claw marks like that, usually on trees, but never before on my house. But it didn't bother me. I would just be more careful when I stepped outside. You didn't want to run into a bear without some sort of protection. Later that evening, after dark, I took Dutch out to go to the bathroom. And that's when I heard a scream. A blood-chilling scream. I grabbed Dutch immediately, and we ran back inside. I locked the door and grabbed my .50 cal, a little memento from my days in the military. I turned off all the lights and I stayed quiet. I didn't sleep that night. I heard whatever was outside instead. I could hear it walking around in my yard, shuffling past trees and making its way around the house. When it was in front of me, right in the view of the window next to me, I needed to satisfy my curiosity, so I looked through my blinds, and there I saw it. The most inhuman-looking thing I'd ever seen or imagined. It was tall, at least 2 feet above me. It looked hungry, starving. It had that deranged look in its eyes like it needed food, and it would do anything for it. But that wasn't the only thing about its eyes. Its eyes were solid black pools. But when it turned its head and looked right into my eyes, my heart felt crushed. Instantly, I pulled myself away from the window, praying under my breath that it didn't see me, but I know it did. I was speechless. I sat there for a good hour. Then, suddenly, Dutch began running to the back door, and before I could get the courage to lift myself up and to go get him, I heard something tear through the thin wood of the door and the screen beyond it, followed by the disturbed screams of my dog in pain. I ran, yelling nonsense in my panic. When I made it to the back door, the doorknob was ripped off, and the screen beyond it had a hole ripped through it. Dutch lay outside, motionless. He laid there on the ground, and he didn't get back up. Whatever had visited us that night, it was gone, and it left me more alone than I had ever felt before. It took my Dutch from me, whatever it was. He was everything left that I cared for in this world. Now, I still live in the cabin, and I haven't seen anything since, even after putting up several cameras all around the place. I have enough firepower to level a small country if I need to. I'm not leaving until I find that thing and give it what's coming to it. But it's been so long since then. I don't think it's coming back, and I'm starting to doubt my own sanity. Number 3. The Grinning Men, submitted by Saxinia. I'm 26 years old, and I live in Germany. By the time this story happened, I was around 11 or 12. But still, thinking about it, it sends chills through my back. I lived in a city that was supposed to be quiet, but apparently not safe. I was used to it, and our apartment is at a safe and nice place. Right in front of the apartment is a forest. Back then, we loved to play out there, my friends and I. The only rule was, we could only play within our mother's eyesight. One day, me and my two friends, Dome and Alex, started to play hide and seek, one of our most popular games out there. Dome started to count down, and Alex ran into the direction of the straight. I ran around a corner into the forest, and there I saw him. A tall, pale man. He was extremely skinny and had long silver hair. His clothes looked like they came from an old noir movie. He had a dirty coat and a hat. His eyes were bright green, and they had a crazy look in them. When he saw me, he began to smile. It was such an evil-looking grin, showing his disgusting yellow teeth. I stood frozen to the spot as I stared at him. Then he spoke to me with a deep and spine-chilling voice. "Come with me, Sabrina." He offered his hand in my direction, as if I was going to take it. How did he know my name? Did I even know him? He never stopped smiling, and I felt like I would cry at any minute. My mind was reeling, and I was too terrified to move. What did he want from me, this stranger? Then I heard my friends behind me. Alex called to me. "Fast, over here, Sabrina." I turned around in an instant and was so happy to see my friends. We ran back into my apartment, and I told my mother about the strange man. Afterwards, she went out back in the woods by herself to see if she could find the man. But she told us later she saw no one. So I decided the best bet would be to try to forget about it and to stay away from the woods. That night we played inside, playing new games we had to make up, and it mostly worked. My friends ended up staying over that night, and as we woke up in the morning, I still had this grin burned into my mind, an image of the stranger that I couldn't forget. So I asked my friends what they thought the man was interested in. They just looked at me and asked me, "What man? What was I talking about?" There was no way they could have forgotten about the man just a day earlier. What was going on? I played along, assuming they were playing a game with me, and then we started to change the topic. Years went by. Now, to this day, I still wonder who he was, how he knew my name, and what he may have wanted from me. When I bring it up to my friends, they're still confused and say they don't remember who he was. They claim they don't know what I'm talking about. But that grin, it will always stay with me in my nightmares. I hope I never run into him again. Number 4. Not What I Expected. Submitted by Cayuse. I'm from Poland, and for the past 6 years, I've been a member of one of the biggest paranormal investigation teams in my country. Sometimes people call to us and ask for help with things they think are paranormal. I've got a lot of cases, files, photos, and recordings of strange things, and possibly strange creatures. But this time, I'd like to tell you about one of the weirdest cases I've ever seen. It was 4 years ago. I lived along the Czech and German borders, in a mining community. One day I returned from work and saw an email from my HQ. They wanted me to investigate a call from a village, almost at the Czech border. It was some way away from me, but I lived closer to it than anyone else, so it was up to me. The call was about suspected ghost activity, not in one home, but in the entire village. Both the HQ and I thought it sounded like a poltergeist. I packed up ghost hunting equipment, and I got on my way. It took me about 2.5 hours to get to the place. When I arrived, I noticed how small and quiet the village was. There were only about 10 houses, no shops or even bus stops. I made a circle through the village, just for some fun and to catch the scenery. Then I went to the address the HQ had given me. It was a pretty wooden house in the middle of the village. When I knocked on the door, a young man opened it for me. He said that he and his wife moved in about a month earlier. He was a writer, and this place was perfect for him to work at his books. But there was something that made him and his wife scared to live there. They said that at night, they would always hear noises coming from the nearby woods, and that this ghost was making things around their home disappear. As we finished talking, I went for a walk. I walked around near the forest's edge, looking for anything strange. I found some wolf, deer, rabbit, and even fox prints, nothing special. But then I saw something rather strange. At one tree, there were large, deep scratches, sort of like a bear's. But there weren't bears at that part of the country. Just beyond that area, further into the woods, there was a small lake, so I figured an animal came to drink some water, and for some reason scratched up this tree, maybe to mark its territory. After a while, I came back to the village. I set up some cameras, hid some of them in the trees, put some sound recording devices and set them up at the base of their barn. I was sitting and watching the cameras, drinking on an energy drink, when suddenly I saw something strange on one of the cameras, like something crawled through the grass. It moved toward the house exiting the woods. I grabbed my knife and began to move toward the couple's house, where the unsuspecting couple was sleeping inside. At this point, I was thinking that this ghost is just someone kidding around. But that was a huge misunderstanding. I crawled to the end of the rooftop and started to observe the area. For a moment, I didn't see any movement. But then I finally saw it. It was indeed inhuman. It was a humanoid-looking animal, though. Its skin was pale, almost blue in a way. It looked skinny and starved, and it had very long fingers, not like claws or something, just normal, long fingers. It really did look like a person, but I knew it wasn't. Not after seeing the way it moved, the way its bones were shaped unlike ours. For a moment, I didn't know what to do. I just stared at it. I'm glad it never saw me or felt my presence, otherwise I didn't know what I would do. As fast as I could, without making any noise, I got down from the roof and ran back to my little base. I grabbed a stick, poured some oil on it, and lit it. And then I rushed into the field. The thing was there, almost touching the wall of the house, about to crawl inside via the window. When it saw me, first it looked like it didn't expect to see anyone. Then it made a strange, long, drawn-out scream, then took off at full speed through the woods. And by God, it was fast. Just imagine how fast a cockroach is when it realizes you've seen it, and it tries to scurry away out of view at an instant, fast speed. That's what it reminded me of. It must have gone from 0 to 35 miles per hour. In the blink of an eye, it was back in the woods and it had vanished. I sighed with relief because I knew if it hadn't gotten scared of the torch, there was no way I could have taken it down. The next morning, I spoke to the owner of the property. I told him what I saw out there, that there are no ghosts involved. Both of us agreed that we can't leave it like that, but there wasn't much more that I could do there. So I just gave him some advice, like how to secure his home, set up traps and stuff like that. Then I left the place, a little unsatisfied with how we ended it, but a little relieved that I don't have to go back there. It was one of those cases I've never solved, and I'll always wonder what that animal truly was. Number 5. Skinless Deer. Submitted by Chelsea T. To begin, let me say I love scary stories. I love listening to them as I fall asleep, like many of us do. My significant other and I are eccentric to say the least. We love nothing more than finding abandoned barns and farms and camping in and around them. Out in the woods, we never lose a wink of sleep, and as hunters/taxidermists, both of us have a vast knowledge of our local fauna. I should add that neither of us believe in the paranormal. Even after this sighting, we're very skeptical. One of our favorite hobbies is driving in the late hours of the night when nocturnal animal activity is at its peak. We scout the dirt roads that cross our delta. You can drive for over 50 miles in any direction and only ever see the occasional farm or maybe small game. That is fun for us, exploring the night, just the two of us and the dirt roads. It was around 1 a.m. We had our eyes fixed on the road, keeping a keen eye out for any eye shine of the typical possum or skunk. Suddenly, we see the eyes we are looking for. Instantly, I slow down, getting ready to see the critters that we always look forward to seeing at night. But as we near it, something is off. The eyes are much higher than usual. My headlights begin to cut through the darkness, revealing the animal. It's walking on the passenger side of the road towards our vehicle slowly. It seemed to be completely unfazed by us or the vehicle, and it was determined to continue walking towards us. As we got within a few car lengths of it, the details revealed themselves. It had some of the usual attributes of a deer or a goat, but it was slender, almost too skinny, like it was malnutritioned. It was taller than a coyote or a dog. Its feet came to points instead of paws. It had a small opening for a mouth, but there were things wrong about this creature. Very wrong. It was fleshy and pink and had no ears at all. It never blinked or even looked at us. Its snout was shorter than normal, giving it a much more rounded, semi-human shaped face. I heard myself say loudly, "What the hell is that?" As we began to pass it, my significant other turned his entire body to follow it. He kept its eyes locked on the strange thing. Noticing that he had also seen it, I responded in turn. "You saw that too? Let's check it out." We'd only made a few car lengths past the animal, and I could still see it in my rearview mirror. I quickly flipped the car around and raced us to the spot we had just seen it. We jump out, flashlights already in hand. Like I said, we look for game at night often, and have our night kit ready to go to observe animals we may stumble upon. We just didn't expect to see anything like this, not that night. No one ever does, I guess. We both were brazen, and have always joked that if we ever did see anything unexplainable, like Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster, that we would track it down to discover what it truly was, instead of running away in fear. We quietly combed the very last spot we saw the thing, and despite both of us coming from hunting backgrounds, we cannot find any trace of any animal being on or near the road. We stand silently, listening for it, and hear nothing. It had vanished into the night. "What did you see?" I asked my significant other. "I guess it was a deer, but it looked like it didn't have skin," he answered. "That's what I saw too. Maybe it was hit by a car," I said, trying to piece together what it could have been. "Or I guess we saw the chupacabra," he joked, as we got back into the car and continued on our night adventure. We still drive by that spot a couple of times a year. Every time we do, the topic of that night never fails to pop up. I still don't have a clue what it was, but after hearing similar stories of other monsters, a part of me is wary when we do go out exploring. I don't really want to believe what I saw was supernatural, but there's no other explanation for it at this time. Be careful out there. You never really know what you'll run into. Number 6. The Forest of Shadows. Submitted by Brad. I want to start this story by saying that I'm no stranger to weird or paranormal things, and this is the story of the beginning of that familiarity, and what started my obsession with things of the spiritual world. I'm 25 years old, and I'm from North Carolina, in a small town sandwiched between Charlotte and the foothills. We are 30 minutes away from the city, and 30 minutes away from the middle of nowhere. It's the perfect amount of urban to rural ratio. My parents have lived in the same house since I was 2 years old. It's at the end of a dead-end road surrounded by woods on all sides for a few miles. The story takes place around the age of 9 in 2001. My days would consist of going to school, coming home from school, getting one of my 2 friends that lived on the same road as us, and either playing on the road or hurting ourselves, or playing in the woods and hurting ourselves again. We played rough, what can I say? Not too long after this story took place, I almost lost my pinky finger via a skateboard, and I still sport a scar that wraps around my pinky, so needless to say, we were fearless. It was a normal day for me. Me and my mom just got back home from getting me from school. After grabbing a snack, I headed outside and decided to walk up to where my road and the main road would meet, and to get to my friend Jason's so we could go play. Shortly after getting to his door, his dad informed me that he was at his grandparents' house, and I would only be able to play by myself today. I was disappointed. I had nothing to do. You can only do so much by yourself, and there wasn't much in the way of doing in that neighborhood, and not really any other children close by, so I decided to find something to do. I walked through an area in the woods we called the Brier Wall. It was the woods surrounding my parents' house, and it was pretty open, except for one area that was next to impossible to get to, due to all the painful briars. I had explored our woods for the most part except for the giant area. I never knew if it was just briar bushes, or was it an open field. That place was still a mystery to me. I'd always wanted to see what was on the other side of those prickly bushes, and my inner explorer screamed to be set free, so I gladly obliged. I went back to my house to get supplies, because living close to the mountains, I'd heard of people getting stuck in the woods, sometimes for days or weeks at a time. Other times, they never came back out. So I got my backpack, put in some snacks, some water, a jacket, and matches. I even grabbed my pocket knife, and I snuck into my older brother's room to steal his machete. Yeah, a 9-year-old having access to a knife and a machete. It does sound dangerous and hard to believe, but this was the South, and my parents and brother had always taught me weapon safety since I was young. I even got my first knife when I was 7. Now on with the story. I walked into the woods and proceeded toward the Brier Wall. As I neared the wall of prickly pain, I recounted how my older brothers and sister told me how they never had been past the wall as well. So it felt more like an adventure now, like I was making the first step beyond the wall. I almost felt like Neil Armstrong or something. I was ready to see what was on the other side. So with that in mind, I began to cut my way through, and for 30 to 40 minutes I hacked away at the briars until I saw a hole. And being impatient, I took my jacket and put it over my face, and I ran through the briars. Some of them sunk into my flesh and pulled at my clothes, ripping them. It was painful, but my need to explore was much stronger than the stinging sensations. On the other side, I pulled out the stickers that broke off the vines and the ones that had stuck into my skin. After a moment or two, I resumed my course, undeterred. The trees in this part of the woods were massive and spaced far apart. At that time in my life, I knew nothing of the woods really, other than they were fun to play in. But from what I know now, I can tell you these trees were at least 100 years old. Each one was around 2.5 feet wide, and they were spaced 30 feet or more apart. Most of them were oak trees, white oak, ash, and poplar, which are super common here, but the age and sheer size of them was amazing to behold. I explored for hours and eventually found a creek that I began to follow, and soon I came upon a delta where the creek split and created a small island in the center. I thought this place was amazing, the perfect spot to set up a base for the next time I came back to the area. Next time I'd bring friends, and I'd show them and brag about all I had seen. I scrambled down one side of the bank, through waist-deep water, and up the other side of the bank. I set my pack and machete down and began to clear sticks and leaves from the ground when I saw something tan or white sticking up from the ground. I began to dig at the object until I pulled out a bone. There were more underneath. Now, being from the South, it's not uncommon to find piles of bones from hunters or just animals decaying in the woods. It intrigued me more than it freaked me out. I was curious to know what kind of animal it was that died, so I dug more. I began to dig and I found something that made my heart skip a beat. I kid you not, even at that age I knew. It was a skull, a human skull. This was something that horrified me. I dropped the skull and began to grab my stuff to leave. And that's when I saw something dark moving through the trees maybe 40 or so feet away. I was scared out of my mind, afraid that I was going to end up in the ground like this guy. I found somewhere to hide. I covered my pack with leaves and got down into the creek, and I backed up underneath the edge of the bank, which had an overhang. I watched as I saw something moving through the trees. It seemed almost like it was floating. It was human in shape, but blacker than black, almost like what you would think a black hole would look like. I'd never seen a spirit before, but I believed this was one, and it scared me more than anything I'd seen before. When it finally passed where I thought it wouldn't see me, I made a break for it. As soon as my feet left the water, it stopped and began to turn toward me. That's when I turned and ran. I looked back twice. It was behind me, coming for me. Then I pushed through the Brier Wall. When I looked back the last time, before I got back out of the woods, it was gone. When I was finally out of the forest, the sun was starting to go down, and I had cuts and scrapes all over me due to my mad dash through the woods and briars. But I left the bag and machete, which made my brother mad at me, and of course no one believed my story, but I knew what I saw was real. Since then, I found out that the land that my parents' house is on, and those woods, used to be a cow pasture back in the 1800s, where supposedly 2 men and a woman were killed. Later on in the early 1900s, dark ritual magic was reportedly done there in the 70s and 80s. Rumor has it people were burned at crosses there. I've had many more experiences in those woods and other places, but those are for another time. Needless to say, I tried my best to avoid that Brier Wall. Number 7. Weird Things in My Woods. Submitted by Thos Phoenix. This past summer, in 2017, my fiance and I began finding weird things in the woods outside of our house. We live in a condo complex in the Northeast that is surrounded by woods with walking trails throughout. When the weather is nice, we spend a lot of time outside. My fiance in particular has several fallen trees that she likes to sit on, and one particular spot that she likes to sit at. I think it's also important to point out that these woods border a pond that we also take our kayaks out on. The only people that we see walking through the woods are maybe 2 people that own dogs, and the occasional people that illegally park in our complex to go fishing or kayaking. We're out there every day for hours on end, when it's warm out at least. Now, the part of the path that we walk on a daily basis extends from this one entry trail to the main path in the woods, and extends down to the left to a beaver dam, then to the right to this clearing in the forest. The trails extend beyond these parts, and more often than not, we only walk the parts described above. One day during the summer last year, we noticed that someone had placed playing cards throughout the path. They were definitely not haphazardly thrown around. They were delicately placed next to fallen logs, nestled in tree branches, inside logs, and placed face up between varying plants along the path. These cards only extended as far as we usually walk, all the way down to the beaver dam to the left of the entry path, and to the right of the entry path by the clearing that I described. In the particular spot that she likes to sit at, we found 2 king cards and a jack perfectly propped up in the tree. Now, this particular spot is a little outcropping into the water from the path that has a tree in the middle, and unless you walk out into the outcropping, you wouldn't have been able to see the cards that were nestled in the tree. So whoever placed these cards also placed queen cards in each of the fallen trees that my fiance likes to sit at. I have a disability with balance, so I never go on them, making them her spot. In the same outcropping, we found a blue rubber ball and an hourglass that had magnetic lodestone on the top of it. We have no idea what the purpose of these things were. We took the cards, the rubber ball, and the hourglass back to the house, and we put them in a bag. About a month or 2 later, when my fiancé was out of town doing an herbal training thing across the country, I made it a point to continually walk the woods and see if I found anything else suspicious. Sure enough, I found cards in her favorite spot again, now written on with Sharpie and a notebook-sized paper note. I was out there every hour patrolling the day before, so the note must have been left out there when I wasn't there. Maybe in the middle of the night, I don't know. I'll type up what I can make out of the note here, but some of it is difficult to read because of the handwriting, and also because I found it the day after it rained. To my dear friend who I love and care about so much, please take the time to undo all the things that have caused me pain through waiting to get out of this maze of the heart and battle. The mind no longer needs to suffer every time another heart goes astray, as needs wait upon the carnage of the battle. Peace waits and suffers with you along with those whom care in a truly meaningful way. No jokes know the answer to the trail, attempts to undo Father, for they have nodded again and again not by himself, for he has not undone by the reasons unknown to those who waited to save and help Father. Those who must find the way to save and or come to him without the interference and existence of any common oppositional group and individual, living to be again to reign or cause upheaval to one family and again, attempt to hear family and one people and children of one apart. The common oppositional group has tilled countlessly to return and be again but no longer are. Since art is the family of the beginning, and inborn of only myself and of the girls who love you, and family is important, and two little girls are also along with their real daddy and real father. The false parents who lied and are common of opposition and evil and hatred and folly, and no longer do exist and no longer get created to be again same with any common opposition, whom are the same enemies of all past moments, except those that ever had to do with truth, perfection, power, and all the things important then to the opposition only could exist for a short time. When reviewing and scanning all the things I found, I did find a second page of the note which I forgot about, so I'll try to write that here. Along the left side it says, "You all seem very friendly and beautiful." Along the top it says, "Just say friend, invite me in, or for auth e vakplun." And on the other side of the note, he says more mindless things, along with referring to himself or themselves as the Lonely Walker. Several cards had also been thrown into the water near the clearing that is to the right of where we enter the woods. I hopped in my kayak, picked them up, and called the police about it. When a cop showed up, he took a look at the note and the cards and told me what he thought. The cards said things like, "Love you girls. If you need a friend to talk to and walk you to places that are fun to drive. You're so pretty. Call the number if you want a true friend. My words are my words, none can be true. I'll be watching and waiting." He said it was probably somebody watching us and was looking to make a friend, albeit creepily. But because the note and cards did not contain threats, there wasn't anything he could do, and he advised us to just be aware of our surroundings when outside. The cards also had a Latin phrase and a phone number on the back. The police officer called the phone number, but nobody picked up, even though whoever left the note and the cards had written to call the phone number if you need a friend to talk to, or something along those lines. There were Latin phrases as well. Ipse et ipse solus scit omne verum. Amor fortior est quam mors, omnia visit, amor ad infinitum oesus. Duenos infinitum, duenos nos adoramus quod celsitudinem. When I tried translating it, I got something like, "He knows the truth and only the truth shall make you learn how to see it. To believe love is stronger than death. Love conquers the infinity. Good we know what highness experience, good infinity, good we know what highness." Nothing occurred after that. I mean that I didn't find anything further, but it still really creeps me out. My friend suggested that I put it up on Reddit and see what anyone thinks. If I can figure out how to upload the images of the note and cards, I'll do that as well. If anyone might know what it all means, I'm open to interpretation. It's all very weird. I'm wondering if there will be anything else out there this upcoming spring or summer, but I'm feeling a bit better about it as I'm in the process of getting my pistol permit. Not that I'll be looking for something to happen, but at the very least I'll be prepared. Number 8. Something Among the Birch Woods. Submitted by Katerma. I live in eastern Finland, in a small city. Most of the cities here are like openings or holes in a forest, if you look at them down from the sky. In the Finnish folklore, there are many stories of forest creatures and spirits that guard the forests and lead people astray. There are even stories of forest shrouding, where some force confuses a person who is in the woods, so that they get lost for years. Some say there is an upside-down world there, where all kinds of wondrous and scary ancient beings live. There are stories of people going into the forest shroud and making it out years later with odd stories to tell. There's this birch forest near my home. A black river streams through it and floods it in the spring. I usually walk the dog in there because I think it's beautiful. Pure birch tree forests aren't that common even in here, and the trees are quite old, some of them huge. Old, full of fungi, and twisted. Sometimes I take the kids there too. My daughter is very sensitive in a way. From an early age, she's been seeing and talking to imaginary things, some of them which were odd. For example, my now past grandmother. My daughter, she never met her, but often talks to her and about her. One day when we were eating at our dinner table, she just stood up, looked out the window and burst into tears, crying, "Goodbye, Mama." That was the end of the imaginary friend that we thought was my grandmother. It's curious, because I think my daughter kind of reminds me of her too. One time during the day, when we were walking among the birch woods, my daughter creepily said to me there was somebody there. She said it was a dead horse named Lotta. She told me it was very old and lived out here. I laughed at her. I'm just used to these stories from her. I smiled and shrugged and laughed at them, but there was always this weird undertone to her stories. They were fantastic and imaginative, but eerily consistent, like an unconscious hint of a memory. I think she's a smart child with a good imagination. But when she cries at night and I walk into the room to find her sleepwalking and pointing at an empty chair in the middle of the room, it feels uncanny, like there's something between the lines. A couple of months ago, it was a full moon, and I was walking my dog at night. I was going for a walk in the birch forest. The moon painted the frost bluish. As I approached the forest, the birch trees rose from the frozen ground like these white, upside-down ruins, and behind them, just black with hints of more white sides of the trees. It must have been like 100 meters away. I must have been 100 meters away from the house when I heard something from the dark forest. Something heavy was moving around in there, crashing through the trees. Sometimes I've heard the rabbits scream in there when a lynx or a fox gets them. The rabbits scream like a small child when they're being killed. But this was something different. A wild boar, maybe a moose. The dog was also interested in the sounds, its ears pointed upwards towards the sky. We walked closer to the white trees and the noises got louder. We both stopped to look. The dog didn't bark, it just pointed its nose towards the sound. As we walked back and made it to about 20 meters away from the tree line, the sounds stopped. For a while, it was just quiet, and then it started again. Something began running in the forest near the tree line, not from us, but towards us. It gives me chills just remembering this, heavy, amazingly fast footsteps. I start to think it was bipedal, according to the sounds it made. It made 20 to 30 meters in only a few seconds. I sat there frozen on uneven forest ground. I looked between the trunks over fallen trees and bushes, thinking, this isn't a human being at all, and it's definitely no moose. My dog's head turned accordingly to the movement as we heard it. And then it stopped, right before us. I felt the darkness staring at me, and I stared back. For sure, I wasn't going in the forest with something in the dark facing towards us. Just to the left of the path I was going to walk to enter the forest, making sounds in front of us, I started to back away from the tree line, never facing away from the sounds. Whatever was in there, it was interested in us, but didn't seem to want to come out of the forest. I wasn't about to turn my back to it, that was for sure. My hands curled into fists. The dog's tail was between its legs as we backed away. The sounds kept going, and I could hear them even from over 100 meters away. It was then that I turned my back on it and began to walk faster. I thought of all the possible forms the darkness could have taken in there if I'd went in, or if I had a flashlight with me. The terror I felt that night was more real than I'd ever felt before. I rushed home and locked the door. Even my wife got nervous seeing me spooked like that. I've been in the forest almost every night since then, walking my dog as usual, but we haven't heard anything like it since. I've always been on high alert since that night. Wondering about what was in there that night might just be better than having found out. I've never seen or heard anything move so fast in the forest before, but then I think of the dead horse my daughter said she saw. I know little children see things, but I also know their interpretations of them might be incorrect. They see more than us adults who have learned to see the world around us in a certain way, but therefore lacking the ability to describe it. Maybe she didn't see a dead horse after all, but something that she couldn't describe in any other way. Maybe a forest spirit from the ancient times, maybe a keeper that sometimes plays games and tricks on those who come into its domain. Or maybe I entered the forest shroud and was close to never returning. Number 9. The Thing in the Woods. Submitted by Munch 82. I'm from a small military community in Canada. Nothing bad ever happens here, which makes what I'm about to tell you all the more creepy. This happened to me, my best friend, and my best friend's brother about 5 years ago. I had just turned 12, and I was staying the night at my best friend Nate's house. About a block away from his house, there was a small bit of forest, so Nate's older brother Logan suggested that we should go exploring there. We were adventurous kids, so Nate and I happily agreed. Later that day, we met up there, the place we called Hermit's Hill. We got there and explored for a bit, but the whole time I had this odd sensation, the one you get when you're being watched. Now, I've always been a cautious person. Nate and Logan knew this, so when I told them how I felt, they just dismissed it as me being paranoid. We had been there for almost an hour, and at this point, the three of us just sat back on the bank of the creek that ran through the forest. The boys were just talking, but I was still freaking out, because that feeling from earlier was now amped up to 11, and I had no idea why. Then Logan began to whistle, which was nothing out of the ordinary, but from somewhere in the forest, we heard someone whistle the exact same way as Logan did. All of us froze and looked in the direction it had come from, and as Logan went to whistle again, it happened. From Nate's right came a low voice from the bushes that said to us, "Do you want to play?" And with that, we all took off running back home. I'd never run so fast in my life. We could hear him yelling all your typical creepy stranger lines as we ran. At one point, I thought I could hear footsteps behind us, and all I could think about was that I was going to be taken and never found. I quickly glanced behind us, but when I looked back, I ended up hitting my head on a branch and got it right in the eye. I was in so much pain that I temporarily forgot what was going on. The next thing I knew, I was being dragged out of the forest by Nate and Logan. At that point, I'd passed out due to a combination of pain and fear, and when I woke up, I saw Nate over me asking me if I was okay. I sat up slowly and looked around with my good eye. We had made it out of the forest okay, at the end of where the creek had started. After that, we went back to Nate's house, and his mom took care of my eye. Even these days, the three of us continue to talk about what happened that day in the forest, and we speculate on what or who it was. But we never have gone back to Hermit's Hill, and I certainly never will forget how scared I'd been. And number 10, The Woods Behind My House, submitted by Lygia. I live in the woods, There's a couple of 100 acres in those woods behind my house, and I honestly love it more than anything. However, it can be very creepy. Between the hunters that own the property behind ours and almost getting shot by them, as well as teenagers sneaking into the fields in the middle of the woods to party, my childhood was kind of exciting, I suppose. When I was around 10 or 8 years old, my friend and I had a cheap EVP recorder we used for giggles. We asked the typical questions out in those woods. Is anyone there? Show yourself. We never took it seriously and laughed about it as kids do. But one day when we did it, we played back a recording and heard something say, "Leave," in a whispery voice. Occasionally, there would be gunshots that sounded like they were right outside the window, but there'd be nobody out there. We found a severed rabbit head once, but when we thought it was coyotes, my dad noted how it was such a clean cut, and he was right. The cut was perfectly horizontal. We once found an old abandoned building out there with a hole covered by a plank of wood. It went down until we couldn't see the bottom. One day when we went back to that hole, we heard someone yelling from the bottom. We tried to tell my parents, but they didn't believe us, and they told us to stop going too far out into those woods before we got lost. The place was full of creepy things, and I do believe that it may have been haunted. But I loved going out there. Maybe the horrifying parts added to my curiosity. The woods are vast. If you ever get lost in them, they might just seem endless. Little did you know that the last thing you'd have to worry about when getting lost in the woods is dying of thirst or starvation. Because, as you can probably tell from these stories, it's often something else that gets to you first, something that defies all human explanation. Good night. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Be sure to send me your stories using the links in the description, and think about purchasing a shirt from morbidmonsters.com. You could be wearing one of your favorite monsters from this channel on a shirt. Oh yeah. Anyway, also consider donating $1 through Patreon. I'm trying to make sure that this channel is sustainable for its costs, no matter what happens with YouTube. And you guys are my hope. Anyway, thank you for listening. As always, stay safe out there, and stay creepy.